And even from my own observations, this tendency for bad shepherds to come out, false leaders and everything is very, very common. And looking at this, I've identified that there's a spectrum, 2 poles to a spectrum of what we would label as bad shepherds, false religious leaders, okay? And the first is what I would call the religious zealots. The religious zealots. This is what you think they are. They're the hyper-legalistic, ultra-religious Christians who only end up putting more burdens on people, okay? They create extra laws that maybe work for them in their day and age, but honestly, they've been so calloused by their tradition that they forget to see that God could do something new in a sinner's life, right? They refuse to talk with people about their doubts. They refuse to listen to people's stories. They shame instead of console. They shout instead of listen. They hurt instead of help. They claim they're of God, but due to their overbearingly zealous nature, they only push people away from wanting anything to do with this church. And so the core issue with religious zealots is that they overemphasize truth at the expense of grace, forcing a particular perspective and way down people's throats so much that they drive them away. And if you have ever fallen under the care of a religious zealot, and you've experienced your own form of church hurt, hear it from me. Hear it from Resilient Church. We're sorry. I'm sorry. Because that was never how God intended his church to be. Ever. And those churches and those leaders, man, maybe as well-meaning as they are, misrepresent who our Jesus is and what his mission for the church was called to. And the fact you're here, I'm so grateful. So grateful. It's a religious zealot. But on the other side of the spectrum is a religious leader that on the surface, we won't think there's anything wrong with this. Okay? And I call this shepherd the well-meaning affirmer. The well-meaning affirmer. So these are the pastors, these are the church leaders who are honestly, this is what they do really well. They love everybody. They love everybody. They're so affirming of every person who comes through their doors. They're grateful for any life experience they've had, right? It doesn't matter their past, doesn't matter their background, doesn't matter their experience or whatever. They love them right where they're at. And that's what we strive to do right here at Resilient Church, right? Because I believe firmly that that's what Jesus would want us to do. But well-meaning affirmers tend to take things one step a little further. And that they are so affirming of every single person that comes through, with their beliefs and with their paths towards a good life and whatever they say their truth is, whatever they deem as good, and they say that is all great because at the end of the day, we're all going to the same place. We're all going to the same place. As long as you're being a good person and how you would define a good person, as long as you're doing the things that you feel good, who are we to judge? And as well-meaning as that is, oh man, well, let me back up. And here's the craziest part with well-meaning affirmers, okay? We love these people. We love these people. Because who wouldn't want to be affirmed in the things that you love and the things that you're doing, whether it's good for you or not? If you think it feels good or whatever, they're going to have you just chase it all, whatever that looks like, okay? We love these people. But again, in all of their good intentions, they lead people astray. They lead people astray. Because the core issue with well-meaning affirmers is they overemphasize grace at the expense of truth. If such a thing even exists, right? Let me tell you, if you've ever fallen under the care of that, or if you've lived your life in that kind of way where just whatever you do you, that kind of a mentality from a religious leader, let me tell you, that's also not what Christ had intended for his church, for his people. And here's the craziest part about these two religious leaders, okay? The religious zealots, in their shaming and condemnation, push people away from the church. And it's often the people who are pushed away from the church who come all the way over here to the well-meaning affirmers. But what the well-meaning affirmers do in accepting all of them and all of these beliefs and everything, wherever they're going to be ending, they find community, but they push people away from Jesus. Neither of those quite represent what Christ had intended for his church. Okay? Neither of those. And I imagine we're all coming here from different perspectives. We're all coming here from different life experiences and what we think of God. Maybe some of you have been in the church for a long time, and this is great. Some of you are here and you're completely skeptical. Maybe you've been hurt by the church. Maybe you've kind of been living your own life, however that looks like. Wherever you're at, hear me. We are so pumped that you're here. That you would even give this church a shot. We are so stoked. And in light of us wrestling with the very reality of church hurt and misguidance and all of these things, we can identify with the group of people that Jesus is speaking to. Okay? So coming out of this situation where Jesus heals this man born blind and the religious leaders are freaking out about it, they start grilling Jesus and everything, and they're drawing this crowd. And in the midst of that, Jesus responds to this situation with these words in John 10, beginning in verse 1. Here's what he says. I tell you the truth. Anyone who sneaks over the wall of a sheepfold, rather than going through the gate, must surely be a thief and a robber. But the one who enters the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep recognize his voice and come to him. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. And he has gathered his own flock. He walks ahead of them, and they follow him because they know his voice. They won't follow a stranger. They will run from him because they don't know his voice. Pause. Anybody confused at what Jesus is getting at here? Don't worry. The people listening in were confused as well. This is what they say in verse 6. Those who heard Jesus use this illustration didn't understand what he meant. They were confused. So he explained it to them. I tell you the truth. I am the gate for the sheep. All who come before me were thieves and robbers, but the true sheep did not listen to them. Yes, I am the gate. Those who come in through me will be saved. They will come and go freely and will find good pastures. The thief's purpose is to steal and kill and destroy. My purpose is to give them a rich, satisfying life. Maybe that didn't help clear things up, but just to get us a little bit more context for what Jesus is saying. So he's making this comparison, right, to the Pharisees and all these religious leaders of their day, to shepherds and robbers and thieves and murderers, and the people of God as sheep. Okay, so that's the comparison here. And Jesus is using this illustration of shepherds and their flocks out in the wilderness. And at night, the sheep would have been herded into these walled enclosures, constructed of about waist high of stone walls with some thorn bushes tossed on top of it. And that was a safety mechanism. One, so the sheep wouldn't leap out of the pens. Two, to protect them from any animals who'd come in and rip them to shreds, right? Pretty good system. The pens were designed to protect the sheep. Okay? The pens were designed to protect the sheep. And at the front of these pens was a small little doorway or a gate that served as the only entrance and exit into these little pens. And the shepherd would either close off that doorway with more thorn bushes, or he himself would stand in the gate to not let his sheep exit and enter. Because he himself could lead them into the safety of the pasture that would otherwise lead them into a very dangerous environment. Okay? These sheep trusted their shepherd. Shepherds, because, I don't know, maybe they were slightly crazy and they had no one else to talk to, they talked to their sheep all the time. Probably named them, hey, Bob, how you doing? You looking good today. Carol, hey, I don't know how they talk to their sheep. But they talked to them so much that sheep knew the shepherd's voice. They sang to them. They even serenaded their sheep, because they have nothing else better to do, I guess. But so much so that they wouldn't need to drive their sheep along. They wouldn't need to shout at them and push them. He could just simply walk straight ahead, and by speaking, the sheep could follow them because the sheep knew the shepherd so well. right? And on the flip side of all of that, anyone else who forced their way into the sheep pen by hopping over the wall or not caring about the well-meaning of the sheep, they weren't truly shepherds. They weren't truly shepherds. They were robbers, they were thieves, they were murderers who did not have his sheep's best interests in mind. That's the illustration that he's giving here. And this illustration not only spoke to the religious leaders of Jesus' day and addressing all those issues, but there are direct comparisons to our own time, day, and age of the religious leaders. We're a little more false, a little more off the edges than what God intended. And so in his words here, first he addresses the religious zealots, beginning in verse 8, when Jesus says, all who came before me were thieves and robbers. He's talking about the religious leaders of his day. He's talking about the religious leaders. They were thieves and robbers of the Pharisees. So when he says in verse 10 that the thief's purpose is to steal, kill, and destroy, he's actually talking about these bad shepherds who had no good intentions for their people. No good intentions. Who cast all the unnecessary burdens and everything, right? But this phrase also serves a double purpose because it's also a reference to the enemy, the devil, Satan himself, whose entire goal is to lead his people astray, to leave them caught in their sins, to leave them bounded by their sins and their habits and their struggles and all of these things to keep people separated from God as long as possible, right? So I don't think it's a coincidence that one of the ways how the enemy would lead people astray from God is by corrupting God's leaders and caretakers, right? Perhaps there's no quicker way to ruin someone's pursuit of the vibrant life with God than being misguided by a spiritual leader. But notice, what does Jesus, as the Good Shepherd, offer instead of these religious zealots? He says that my purpose is to give them a rich and satisfying life. He's not talking about more money. He's talking about giving them a life to the fullest. A vibrant life. You know the big words that we have right there on that passage? Right there in that corner? A vibrant life? That's what Jesus gives. These bad shepherds, they're going to offer burdens and all of this other stuff. Jesus, as the Good Shepherd instead, truly, like if you're looking for meaning and purpose and just a person to go to in your darkest times, someone to lift you up and give you the fullest joy, look no further than Jesus. Jesus will never give you up. He'll never let you down. He'll never turn around and search. Sorry. He's never going to let you down. In our pursuit of living a life that makes sense for us to be good. One person in here who doesn't want to be a good person. Every single person does. Right? But Jesus is the one who shows us the love of God better than anybody else could. He sees you. He knows your past. He knows your struggles. He knows who you are. He's not afraid by your questions. He's not afraid of your hurt. He's not afraid of all this stuff that you have going on in your life. He loves you and he wants you a part of his church movement. You belong a part of his church. And I, again, apologize for anybody who made you feel like you never could be, because that is so far from the heart of God. It doesn't matter who you are. He loves you. He wants you to come into a relationship with him. Right? That's how he addresses the religious zealots of our day. But how does he address the well-meaning affirmers? How does he address the well-meaning affirmers? In verse 9, Jesus says, "Yes, I am the gate. Those who come in through me will be saved. They will come and go freely and will find good pasture."